Well, it is 8:30 Pacific, and I want to make sure that Dr. Naughton has all the time he needs to deliver this wonderful spotlight session today. So I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. Welcome, everybody. My name is Teresa Keurig, and I am the Vice President for Faculty Affairs at UAGC. And I am honored to introduce today's spotlight speaker, Dr. Blake Naughton, the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, Teaching and Learning for Online Initiatives at the University of Arizona. Blake brings to us more than 25 years of teaching, research, and leadership experience in both government and higher ed sectors. As a policy analyst and researcher in the National Center for Higher Education and Public Policy and the Congressional Research Service, and as a senior leader in campus extension, continuing education, and workforce development programs at institutions like the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Missouri, and Colorado State University. I love this session title because it's so unexpected. Shred your strategic plan and craft a learning plan instead. Dr. Blake Naughton, the person with a master's degree in higher ed planning from Harvard and a PhD in education administration and policy analysis from Stanford, is telling us to shred our strategic plans. What does that mean? Having reported to Blake for the past couple of years, I can give you a little hint. It means rigorous thinking, being candid, and embracing some productive discomfort. And this is the most important part. It means being heard, being empowered, and working with the confidence that your mind and aspirations are both valid and valued. You just have to plan your learning. And Blake is going to help us understand how to do that today. While Blake's accomplishments at UAGC are numerous, ranging from a successful WASC reaffirmation to the expansion of the UAGC academic portfolio, his greatest contribution has been transforming our culture, systems, and outcomes. And he's accomplishing that not through a strategic plan, but through his commitment to building a learning organization. And now I'm excited to give the floor to Blake, and later in this session to welcome back yesterday's spotlight speaker, Dr. Bill Balzer, who will join Blake for a comparative discussion of continuous improvement approaches. Over to you, Blake.
All right, thanks, Teresa. That was lovely. Having the privilege of working with Teresa and her team, they run this conference for the past year and a half. It's funny listening to you talk about me. So thanks for that. And thanks for being a critical part of the team. Yeah, this is going to be a fun ride, hopefully today, a fun conversation, and it's a culmination of a lot of work in this space. People literally paying me to teach them how to do strategic planning, and I'm throwing it out. So I hope that you come to this space today with a mindset of learning and not in a mindset of like taking notes for instruction, but to say, hey, what if we think differently? And what could that look like? So that's what I hope for today. And I do thank Dr. Balzer for joining us. We'll have a little conversation at the end. I loved his presentation yesterday, and I look forward to just seeing where this goes. So let me start with how we got here. All right, let's think about strategic planning in higher education for just a minute. This is the thing that I geek out on. Like Teresa mentioned, I have a couple degrees in this and used to teach it both for credit students and as a consultant and in other areas. And so I'm deep. I know a lot about this. So I'll give you just the high points. Really, it was in the 70s and 80s that the whole world of planning in higher education had a big shift. Higher education before that kind of was, just laconically going along and responding to its environment and doing the next best thing, primarily driven by faculty and not by any professional planning system. But that began to change in the 70s and 80s as the massification of higher education really took over the United States, and all these institutions and all these baby boomers that went to college and all that expansion of the two-year sector led to, hey, we probably ought to figure out how to run these things to get the outcomes that we need, particularly as the boomers aged out and higher education was more and more thinking about its bottom line and filling their seats that were then empty. So that shift began to strategic planning along the way. And that you can see shifts in institutionalization through things like it being professionalized. The Society for College and University Planning, the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems. These kinds of things emerged, these organizations in the 70s and really took off in the 80s. And they were out selling things like objectives and dashboards. Um, key faculty, including Keller, who wrote Academic Strategy, and Bob Zimsky at Penn, who started responsibility-centered management, were critical in sort of saying, what's this look like in higher education? But the real underlying part of it during this era that set a shift, particularly in the 1980s, was the US competition with Japan in the automotive sector. And Chrysler and GM weren't doing as well as Toyota. And a big reason for that was perceived to be quality. And so quality management came in, and someone named Edwards Deming and a whole bunch of other people came in with the alphabet soup of the ways to improve performance, particularly in industry, particularly in manufacturing and organization. So from that became plan, do, study act cycles, the DMAIC principles, where you define and measure total quality management, or TQM, came in, the National Baldrige National Quality Award, Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. All these things happened. So this, we started to have awards for it. We started to have consultants for it. We had all the books for it. It became a thing. It was intersected then with that emerging strategy in higher education. In the 1990s, it really took off, particularly in the good governance movement. The things, if you remember Al Gore saying he was going to put measurement in government, that applied to higher education, particularly public higher education. And the shift came to accountability, that our public institutions in particular, but also our private institutions who took public funding, ought to be accountable for the outcomes. And how are we planning for that? How is strategy doing that? So that became massive in US higher education. The assessment movement came in, where we started measuring learning really across the board in higher education for the first time. Alberta College in Milwaukee, some nuns really got this right, and everyone took off doing it. We started shifting from those dashboards that manufacturing used to balanced scorecards. Balanced mean better in nonprofit and education sectors. The Baldrige Award made first healthcare criteria, then education criteria, and states started to adopt in the late 90s performance-based funding in the early 2000s, funding for results, the kinds of systems that if institutions, higher education institutions, colleges, universities planned for and achieved certain results, then they would get increases in their funding along the way. So those decades were a huge shift from the way that we ran higher education in the past, which was much more faculty based and much more entrepreneurial in the moment based on individual proclivity. So what's happened recently in the 2010s and now the decade that we're in? Well, those things are institutionalized. You all know it. You breathe it every day. For those of you that haven't been around as long as I have working in higher education, you just may think this is like the way things have worked forever. It's not true. Our institutional research officers are now usually called institutional effectiveness. We routinely have planning and strategy officers. We have required plans by boards and legislatures. We have advanced data systems now, and of course the technology has shifted so that we can measure anything and everything, and we have dashboards and people that do that all day long at our institutions. We have performance review systems that are tied to goals and metrics that are tied to the goals and metrics of the institution. We even have bonus systems for our university presidents based on performance along the way. So it is how we work in higher ed. It is the lifeblood. It's hard to imagine it any more than on main campus. It's hard to imagine not having classrooms and dorms. Like, this is just how it is. So the question then, after all this time and over 50 years of this business, how is it going? Well, let me tell you, I'm a part of this problem. I have worked in all these spaces, as Teresa alluded to. I'm a senior fellow right now at the National Center for Education Management Systems, working on a grant from Ascendium Foundation on rural workforce education. When I was at the College of Education, I got other grants for places like Dell and Kauffman to do planning, particularly for school districts. I did this kind of work and taught it at Penn. I was a part of building networked improvement communities and the way that we do learning through the Carnegie Foundation and its work. Particularly in the past 15 years. It's something that Dr. Balzer and company probably understand from the book that they're writing related to the way that we ought to do learning and improve learning in classrooms and that sort of thing. So I've been a part of this. I've seen it. And so I have opinions on it. All right. I've been a part of it. And it's because during all this time, when I have been full-throated, we ought to do this, we ought to make better, because the industrial engineer that I studied as undergraduate in me just keeps coming out. I used to teach how we do Baldrige. I used to teach the goals, objectives, the actions. I used to teach how we measure it. I had all those goals and strategies. I had all the PowerPoints. I had all the frameworks, had all the data systems. It's good stuff. There's lots of people who their entire professions are doing this, and they're doing good work. I don't want to diminish it. It's good work for our institutions. It's what a lot of places really need, including the University of Arizona Global Campus, to really understand how we're getting to where we're going. And so it's an important part of our fabric. And we have to ask ourselves, is it working? Has it improved student learning? Has it improved overall performance? Has it improved our faculty and staff morale? Like, do people like their jobs better? Has it improved the national reputation and trust in the higher education sector? And if you know anything about looking at higher education scorecards and measurements over the past 50 years, you're going to be pretty skeptical that we have positive answers to these questions. On the margin, we do have good people using measurement to improve student learning. Is the overall learning of our graduates up? Do employers see that? No. Overall, we have people that are attentive to revenue and expenses in ways we never used to in higher education. But is the overall budget picture and organizational performance of higher education better? No. Do people in 2025 like their jobs working at universities better than they did in 1975? No. And if you've seen any polling lately, the reputation of the US higher education system is in a ditch. The public is not trusting what we're doing. All of this planning, all of this measurement is not increasing trust. So we have to ask ourselves, if we just do it more with feeling, if this 50-year long experiment in planning hasn't been working, can't we just get it a little bit better and then it'll work? Or is it time to maybe shift our thinking? Is it time to evolve? Are we at a crossroads where we took stuff that was meant to make sure GM could compete with Toyota and applied it to higher ed? And then can we finally admit maybe it doesn't work? That maybe when you manufacture a car, there are fundamental differences than when you teach students. And perhaps we ought to think about a different planning paradigm to improve the way that we perform for our students. And what could that look like? All right, so that's the wind up. Here's the pitch. Let's rethink. What's this look like? I'm going to say the phrase, and if you work with me at UAGC, some of you do, you hear me say how might we all the time, to the point that you're probably annoyed by it, and that's all right. But how might we is more than just a question to premise the ideas I'm about to present to you, but it's a stance. It's a stance that takes a step back with humility and be like, I don't know the answer. It's a question. It's the scientific method that Dr. Bowser and others have talked about, where we try something and see how it goes. It's how might we improve something? What might that look like? It is, by definition, a very different stance than a strategic planning paradigm that says, go do this by this date and get this outcome. Those are two different ways of approaching improvement in an organization. How might we steps back, still wants to measure how we do, but ask questions about how to get there. Whereas planning, our traditional way that we've applied strategic planning in higher ed anyway, says, I know what we're going to do 3 years from now in October, and we better get this result, or I'm going to give you a red on a dashboard, or yellow or green or something. What do I mean by that? Well, at this crossroads, and the way to think about that, I want to give you an analogy. And some of you heard me talk about this a little bit before. And if you want to dig deep into this, I recommend to you the book Brave New Work by Aaron Dingham, which is a wonderful piece. I have some other book recommendations at the end of this to think differently about the way that we work. And I think it applies well. And he doesn't talk about higher ed much, but applies well to higher ed and social organizations in general, which is an analogy of thinking differently about intersections. So if we're at a crossroads, let's think about what a crossroads looks like. And it's the difference between a lighted intersection and a roundabout intersection, where you have traffic lights that stop yellow, green on some, algorithmic pattern of letting people through. And the paradigm of traffic lights is predict and control. The paradigm of traffic lights is that we know when the cars are going to come, we know the pacing that we need to have, that traffic engineers figure out the timing, and that you wait your turn, and then you go when you're told to go, and in the order and how you do it. It is analogous to the way we seek to do strategic planning, where we're going to predict what's going on, We're going to have a plan going forward, and people are going to move through their work in that way. And that will lead to the best results, to the fewest accidents, and to cars moving along smoothly in this case. In a roundabout, it works differently. And Americans hate roundabouts. I actually love a roundabout. So I know that this analogy loses some because some people just think they're the worst because they don't understand them or they aren't too familiar with them. But in a roundabout, it's a sense and respond. It's not that there aren't rules, because there are certainly rules in a roundabout. You yield to the left. I have a daughter about to get her driver's license. We talk about whether you signal in a roundabout, all the sorts of things that go through a roundabout. But the traffic keeps moving. You sense what's going on, you look, and you make a determination. The trust is on the individual driver to know what to do to get through that intersection, not a light telling them to turn off your brain and just go when you see green, right? It's a very different way to move. If you know anything about the research of transportation, you will also know that they are safer. There are far fewer accidents and roundabouts, and traffic moves better. The two biggest outcomes that we want on the road is to move along and not get hurt. And they're better in roundabouts, even though Americans typically hate them, because you have to turn on your brain. You have to not just wait to be told what to do, you have to be engaged in the roundabout to get on through. This is the foundational analogy for the learning plan, where we got to trust our people to know what they do and trust how they're going to move through along the way. Then we'll put up some guardrails and some rules like yield to the left, but otherwise people need to go and we need to trust they know how to get there. So in that analogy, there's a possibility for us to evolve from that predicted control strategic plan to a learning plan where we learn what's going on and we keep going. That we don't just stop when we hit green, and I do mean that we stop when we hit green in higher ed. If we hit our marker, then we're done. I finished my accountability rather than keeping going. But we grow and we grow and we grow. So what I'm introducing this word learning plan. And I'm contrasting it to strategic plan. And that's, in some ways, I'll admit to you right at the start, this is kind of a false premise that there's strategy involved in a learning plan and there's learning involved in a strategic plan. But the framing, the paradigm is what this shift is. From something where we predict from the beginning and then control the outcome to something where we're going to trust our people to continue to grow, to serve our students in better and better ways. So what are some differences if we're going to reframe planning in that way, besides predictive control and sense respond? One, the critical component of strategic plan, particularly those implemented in that Toyota mindset, is to reduce variation. What total quality management or all the, you get into the black belts and the things and all the sort of study of how we do control is based on eliminating variation to get, once you determine how to get the best outcome, you do it again and again and again, and you don't want any messiness in there. I don't know how many of you have actually taught students or even advised students or interacted with them anyway, but actually it turns out in my experience over a quarter century of doing this is that it doesn't work. That you can't treat them by widgets, that the context and their story and everything intersects with the reality of their learning, and that we can't just reduce variation to make that learning happen. And I can give you chapter and verse about how a lot of understanding about individualized learning leads us to that truth when it comes to learning as an outcome along the way. So in a learning plan, we're going to, instead of saying don't vary, we're going to say encourage experimentation within bounds of that roundabout that I'll talk about in a bit. And a strategic plan, improvement is the metric. If we hit the target, we did great. The board applauds. We hit, yeah, the dashboard looks good. Yeah, yeah. In a learning plan, learning is improvement. That even if we misstep, something that would end up with a yellow on the metric or a red on the metric, but we learned how to do something better, or we learned what not to do, that's great. That's what we need to do. Every day we figure out a better way to do what we're doing. And that is the goal. That at the end of a strategic plan, you have a nice little glossy of red, yellow, green, where you feel good or bad about yourself. At the end of a learning plan, you actually have a new playbook of how to do your job better and how to support your colleagues better and ultimately how to serve our students better. It changes the work. It doesn't just check a box. It's a big shift in the way that we use planning. In a strategic plan, that outcome is either success or failure. It's good or bad in that glossy. Whereas in a learning plan, we are all learning and growing. And it turns out all the research suggests that that's what people like about the job. is they like learning and growing. They don't like someone sitting there and telling them whether they're good or bad. They do like figuring out for themselves how to be better. That makes them excited about showing up to work every day. A strategic plan and performance funding and all of that is based on fear-based accountability. It's the annual post-mortem performance evaluation where someone looks at your metrics and says whether you did good or bad, and they judge you, and that's all you know at the end of it is whether you hit a mark or not. Whereas a learning plan is a trust-based opportunity to grow, that you have short cycles of talking together about, I tried this, how'd that go, boss? And now I'm going to get better at this. It's not based on someone just telling you, looking backward, whether you should feel good or bad about yourself. It's every day is the opportunity for that individual to grow. It's a big shift that ties into the way that we do performance evaluation as well. A strategic plan is about expectations and accountability. A learning plan is about experiments and change. We have seen in strategic planning mindsets, institutions calcify. Once they're hitting green, they don't want to do much else. That introduces risk. That introduces getting in trouble. That means not getting your merit raise. That means all sorts of things. Whereas a learning plan is there's always the next evolution. There's that great opportunity. There's the expectation that something that I can try something else and that we can try to get even better. And if it doesn't work, we'll just go back or shift gears again. Right? It's an opportunity versus accountability in a lot of ways. All right. So what is this? I'm talking about a learning plan like it's a thing, right? Like you've never heard of it. Google all you want. Like what is this? It's again started with how might we? How might we um improve? How might we serve our students better? How might we engage student learning? How might we enroll more? How might we learn as an organization to get better at all the things that we care about? What would that look like along the way? Well, we can make this complex. And I showed you before, I'm really good at complex. I can do with a spreadsheet with the best of them, right? Like I've taught that, I get that. And I am at a fundamental point in my career and the leadership of the organizations that I love that we need to keep it simple, that we need to be easier, that the complexification of goals, outcomes, objectives, activities, all those sorts of ways that we articulate all that together is too much cognitive load for people to care about. And it doesn't help them to actually improve their practice and doesn't make the organization better. So how do we keep it simple? How do we keep a learning plan simple? I think there's just three parts. There's agreement, meaning a learning plan it is still a plan. Like you got to bring people together. I'm a social beast. I work in social organizations like universities and government. And it means you got to come together and get on the same page. So I'm going to talk about each of these in more depth, but it's that simple. Are we in agreement that we ought to try this? Are we in agreement about what we care about, what our aims are? Are we in agreement? And who's the we? No, think expansively. It's us, our students, our stakeholders. Who needs to agree? It's not just some hierarchical boss, right? That's not agreement. That's authoritarianism. So let's reach agreement. That's step one. Step two is experiment, which is what our spotlight talked about yesterday. That's what this whole learning organization conference is about. Well, how do we try some stuff? We all know when you run an experiment, you need to be rigorous about it. You need to measure the outcome. You need to be diligent about how you plot what you're doing so that you can document that and help people to understand the playbook in the future. And then you look back and say, well, how'd that go? What should we do next, right? And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. That's an experiment. So what are you going to experiment on? What gets you excited? What do you think will work? Who agrees with that? And the third part of it is just as critical, and the part that I think most people don't think about, and where strategic planning particularly fails, is sharing stories. This means nothing if people don't get better from it. I may have my performance review and have my red, yellow, green and do my thing with strategic plan, and I may be the most magical, I don't know, admissions advisor in the country. But if no one else knows the secrets of my trade, how are we getting better at admissions? How are we getting better in serving our students in a counseling environment if I don't share the story of what I tried with certain kinds of students and how that got better? How am I going to get better if I don't have others to listen to? Right? I learned a lot of this through that networked improvement community work with Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, that the critical component of how we learn as an organization is sharing stories. And you can read all the research you want about how storytelling, I use that word carefully, it's not just a report out, storytelling anchors learning. It animates our workforce to see themselves in the activity. It connects to what we do with our students along the way. So that's it. Now, I've led organizations before, and when I kind of talk about this, there's this bit of a pause because people don't believe this part, that that's it. That's really it. This is a learning plan. We come to an agreement, we experiment some things, we share some stories, right? Oh, do you need some data underneath it? Well, maybe we have to have a data infrastructure, right? There's things that make it work. Um, but what we're doing and what we're planning for and how we reflect on how well we're doing as a university and serving our students can be based on nothing more than how might we? How might we achieve X, Y, and Z? What are we going to try this year for it? And then how are we going to share that practice and get better, right? For ourselves and our peer institutions. What's that look like? All right, so let's dive in just a little bit deeper on those three areas. Promise not to go look, this is going to build in annoying ways for everyone. So let me talk through just some aspects of agreement for you. Just some things to think about, and I'll run through this fast and kind of just stuff to chew on. This is world according to Blake stuff based on, really no science whatsoever, other than I've been around and I've worked with organizations and helped them to improve over time. So one thing that we need to think about when we reach agreement is alignment. There's different, you know, teams in our organizations. It's not just the faculty reach agreement that everyone falls in place. We have an advising team. We have a financial aid team. We have a library and tutoring team. We have different teams, and we need to align around what the experiment may be. Are they aligned with organizational priorities and our mission? Is it aligned with the realities of resources and the ways other work? Where's the alignment, right? You can't just experiment by doing whatever you want. How do you align with others along the way? Have you gone through an advice process, right? That means talking about this. You don't just sit down in a dark room and come up with a plan and say that you all agree with this, but you seek advice from colleagues. It is pure hubris for leaders to think they know how to tell everyone what to do. I don't know. There's a lot of people that report to me, and a lot of them know a whole bunch of stuff I have no idea about how to do, right? We have to seek advice, right, along the way and understand the craft and trust the wisdom of our workforce at a local, or if you're new in the workforce, the advice of those that have been around a while. And if you've been around a while, the advice of those that see things in a new way that are new. How do we come together and have those conversations? Now we reach an agreement. Who's involved? What are the resources? Our project management folks, they love this kind of thing. Let's lay out that plan. We don't want to, back of the envelope this. It's a real agreement. Here's what we're going to try. Here's what that's going to look like. What's the way forward? How are we going to know if it's going well? What's our parachute if something goes really wrong and that we need to stop? What's that look like? That means assessing it. That means agreeing as well about like, well, how are we going to know whether this is good, bad, or otherwise, right? That varies into the big goals of like, oh, are we retaining students and graduating students to the little goals of like, oh, are they progressing to the next term? Are they did we get better learning outcomes related to the profession they seek to be a part of, that kind of thing. So we have to agree upon that along the way. So if you don't know where to start and thinking about, well, how do you reach an agreement, think about this. What are you aligned to? Have you sought advice? What sort of things in your practice are you doing? Advice is a critical part of that. If you have any one takeaway from that, I love an advice process that's very deliberate, where we don't go it alone or go through a hierarchy, but we really engage our peers quickly. It doesn't take forever, 19 committees over 6 months, but to really see where things are going. So let's talk about experiments, right? That's fun. What are we doing in our craft? Sometimes it is an experiment just in my own classroom. Sometimes it's a bigger experiment across the organization. Sometimes it's hard to know where to start, particularly if you have worked in an organization um, uh, where you are trying to figure out what's next for you because you've been told what to do all along, and you haven't really been empowered to learn in your craft. You've been told what to do and you've been good at it, but how do you experiment? I anchor this, and I have a impress piece on this related to the drivers of the land-grant university of the future. It's a framework for thinking about the kinds of things that might animate experiments when we can't think about in our practice, whether we're faculty, staff, or stakeholders along the way, what to do for our institution. One is, do we collaborate differently? Am I working with the right people? Is there a way that I might work interdisciplinary as faculty? Is there a way that faculty might work with advisors in a different way? What might be out there that's on the margin of what I want to try to do next that works in the space of collaboration differently? What about reach? What about I know something works well with one population of my students? Does something work well with another population of my students? Or I found this to not work with this. How do I reach and find a practice that might work for that group a little bit better? Reach is about inclusivity. Reach is about how we understand um, the differences in the populations that we serve, and how do we make that throughput work differently, and how do we collaborate with employers, future students, and others in different ways. And so, is there an experiment there? Resources. Are we using resources differently? Are we maybe thinking in terms of value chain in a new way? Where we're thinking, oh, I add this, I could add this, and we could come together and create value and experiment to help our students in a way like this, or that it's more collaborative value and could share resources and do something in a different way or across institutions, or to just redirect and try an experiment where we don't buy this year, we buy this instead, or that we reallocate some people's time to this activity to see what that happens and to see what happens next. And we can think differently about using our resources. Pure old innovation, what people usually think is synonymous with an experiment, which is try something completely new. And that's great. We all should be thinking of that way. With AI coming in, with all the things that higher ed is facing that could be innovative, we have lots of opportunities for this. And it is certainly something that we want to try to bring in that might change the paradigm of what we're doing and to create that in agreement with others. I'm going to try to innovate in the space. I'm going to do this in this new way, and I'm going to rigorously assess whether that works or not. And then I'm going to share that story about how that works. And finally, an experiment thinking about impact, thinking about differently about how we understand the outcome. And when I say that, and this is a guy who has a PhD in education assessment, is that sometimes our experiments are rethinking what we think the outcome should be and redesigning our work around that. Maybe we think our work, we've been in student affairs for a while and our work's been around student satisfaction, whether they like the clubs they're a part of, but maybe that's not the impact that we ought to target, and we ought to run an experiment to think differently about that. So again, if you're wondering about how to get started with experiments along the way, here are some drivers that might spark thinking, just world according to Blake. All right. I love how these slides are building horribly. So let's talk about sharing stories, which I think is the fun part, right? This is really the core of our practice and what we're doing to come together. We think of strategic planning as reporting, where we give it particularly to a board or legislature or something like that. We think of that as our annual performance review or whatever. That's not sharing a story. Sharing stories help build like enthusiasm and joy and celebration in an organization. It helps build transparency in the work. We've all had on our teams that individual that might not be performing as well as 9 times out of 10, that individual is not being transparent about what they're doing or not doing, and they hide. And that's a critical driver of poor performance in an organization. So transparency and sharing that lifts up the performance of our team members. It builds trust. We know what's going on. Oh, you try that. I try that. Great. Now we understand that a little bit better. It helps us think differently for our future agreements and experiments by listening and learning from each other, thinking differently in our own space. So it's not just the one telling the story, it's those engaging with the story that are learning and thinking differently about their own practice. And that's a huge outcome. And so whether the space is, in the department meeting and the big town halls for the organization, in particular report outs on experiments, lots of different ways are appropriate. Sometimes it's appropriate to go to a national conference like this and share a little bit of learning, like I'm trying to do, and share that story to say, hey, this is what I've been thinking, and then engage with others as they help me get my thinking better along the way. All right, how might we with this learning plan? I've said that this is it, that this is it. I just kind of shared some ideas of where to get started with agreements, experiments, and sharing stories. But that doesn't mean that we've actually tested those ideas. It doesn't mean that I know much about how well this goes. So the transparency I have for you is to say that the idea of introducing learning plans in higher education is one that hasn't really been tested. I don't I'm not sitting here as an academic presentation saying after 10 years of doing learning plans, we know the outcomes proved by X and employee satisfaction was lose by Y. But in the spirit of what I just said, how might we? And designing experiments and trying to get at that. And I promise you, I work to reach agreement in the way that we do this. What are some ideas that we might sort of say of like how will we know if the paradigm of a learning plan works? How will we look to the future to see if it is good? For me, that boils down to just a few things. One, improving practice. That industrial engineer with me started my whole career thinking about the way people work, particularly technicians, and thinking about the actual process and workflow and what can help improve performance. And I think the big black box of process and how people work is what's underdetermined in strategic planning, where we set a target and a miracle happens and you're supposed to hit it. This should be focused, if it's successful, on changing the way people work, not just a red, yellow, green, but actual seeing the day-to-day that people's job descriptions and their best practice work routines have shifted. I would measure success of a learning plan by whether people are trying things and being risky and trust that they think the organization is trustworthy enough that they can try something new. If you're existing in a culture that's a fear-based organization where I can put my nose out, but I'm going to get slapped back if it doesn't work, this isn't going to work. So the success of a learning plan to me is whether or not people are actually truly trying something innovative, newly collaborative, reaching others, whatever that is along the way. Um, I think the marker of success for a learning plan would be, is it self-developing, evolving next steps? We have 3 and 5 year cycles of strategic plans. We step back and we do it all over again. There's good reasons for that at some points, but in a learning organization that's truly enacting a learning plan, sometimes things aren't 12 months or 3 years or 5 years. Sometimes they're shorter, sometimes they're longer. And along the way, it becomes self-evident what's next. Here's the experiment we got to do next. That didn't work. Here's what we're excited about. We have alignment on this. Let's go. And rather than that annual performance evaluation looking at the 4 things you said a year ago you wanted to do, it should change throughout the year as you try new things and it evolves and we learn more about our practice along the way. A critical measure of this is, do people like their jobs better? I've taught, as I said, strategic planning for a quarter of a century, um, and nobody seems to like it, and nobody really likes seeing themselves in it, and the performance reviews associated with it, and it really diminishes enthusiasm for work in higher ed. So, is there a different way? That's a question along the way. And I am a measurement guy, like all the way measurement guy. So there should be measurable results. This isn't a like, oh, did you learn anything? Oh, our students are kind of failing, but are we learning? We need to think in measurable results still. A learning plan still has identified aims that we reach agreement on. What are we trying to do? Usually it's, pretty simple. Have some students learn, retain them, and graduate them, right? Well, is that getting better? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. And we need to hold ourselves to that these experiments, while some will contribute and some won't, hopefully they don't hurt, we keep evolving and that needle starts to move. And maybe the most critical part of this talk is that we don't just go, well, that's great. The needle moved at the end of the year. It's green. But we say, we know why. We know what we're doing that we need to keep doing because the learning plan taught us some good learning on practice that we know how to continue to get better. And we're going to double down on that and grow more, right? Rather than just, I'm glad it got better. I'm not sure why they're learning more this year, but we'll know in a learning plan along the way. It's a portfolio of our practice at the end of the day. So that's how I would measure whether this is successful or not. And I invite you all to sort of think through whether you want to be on that train and think it through. So if you want to get into Blake's head and 4 of my favorite books that might get at learning organization kind of thinking, I mentioned Brave New Work by Aaron Dignan. Of course, Reinventing Organizations, the heart and soul of how you think about learning organizations is there. I love, 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 and not just because the author's a former academic advisor of mine, but Simple Rules, thinking about how in complex organizations we make all these standard operating procedures and that actually doesn't help let people through those roundabouts and go along the way. And of course, the Heath Brothers book, Switch, which a lot of you probably are familiar with, which really is just how we think innovatively. If we want to be a trustworthy organization to do something different, we got to think different and how to really wrap our mindset about that. So I might recommend that to all of you as you think about doing this and think about this along the way. All right. Please complete the survey and in the chat. And now I'm going to take this down and invite Teresa and hopefully our colleague Dr. Bowser back if he's able to join to chat, or we could just chat, Teresa, and take questions that might have appeared in the chat, which I was not paying attention to while I talked.
Yes, and there's Bill joining us, and
Yeah,
we do have a couple of questions in the chat that
great,
Haley and I can help you with, but please go ahead and start the conversation however you like.
great. And Bill, it's nice to meet you. I appreciated your talk yesterday, so I appreciate what you and your colleague Vincent are trying to do.
Thanks, Blake. And I really enjoyed your talk as well, I was watching the chat as well, and I know I'm not alone in that. I think the
Okay.
one thing we didn't get from you though is whether we need to use our turn signals when we're in a roundabout. So maybe you or your daughter could tell us what the rules are there, because I certainly don't know. So
You're
uh,
taking the first turn, you turn on the right signal, you turn on the left as you go through, and turn on the right as you exit.
okay.
There is, if take nothing else away from this talk, everyone, it's how to signal through a roundabout. And no one does it, so that's okay.
Well, I think we all are taking away a lot more than just that, and I really like your model. As you know, I'm a continuous improvement guy myself,
Yeah.
and I think there's just so much of the continuous improvement model in there. I am a strategic planner as well, so I'll take my punches and but maybe push back just a little bit.
Yeah.
In the regard that I think there's, at least in the kind of strategic planning that I've sort of gravitated to, which is the continuous improvement approach that Toyota has used, known as Hoshin Kanri, which
Mhm.
I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yep.
There seems to be a lot of overlap between what's being done in the Hoshin Kanri model and what you're doing in the learning plan.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if maybe you could talk a little bit about that, or if I should talk a little bit about that, or um,
Feel free. Yeah, jump in. Yeah, no, I'd love to hear your perspective of how you connect that.
yeah, yeah, and I agree with you. A lot of the strategic planning that has been done over time really hasn't worked for higher education, hasn't worked for organizations, and it also hasn't worked for higher education as well. I remember the days when back, early days at Bowling Green, when the way we developed our strategic plan was the director of institutional research said, "Well, here's our strategy," and everybody says, "Well, I guess that's the guy who develops our strategy for us." So,
Exactly. Yeah.
okay. And then next year we find out what our strategy was for the following year. But nothing happened in the interim.
Right.
So I think my understanding is the way Toyota looked at it is they looked at a lot of the strategic planning models that were being done by GM, were being done by in TQM, the Deming model, and so forth, and said, yeah, we just don't really see how that's going to work for us. And the model that I adhere to, the Hoshin Kanri model, is a lot about strategy development,
Mhm.
strategy deployment, and strategy management. And in my mind, that we did a pretty good job sometimes of the strategy development, and a very, very poor job, if at all, on strategy deployment and management. I think that's a big part of the failure of strategic planning as it's been
Well,
executed in higher education.
I think that's insightful, Bill. And if I may, like what I see from that is I think there has been, and it's fun to, create a very black and white straw man. Strategic planning has evolved in a critical way. If I can hop on what you're saying in the model that includes thinking about the process of development. Higher ed in the past couple of decades has gotten better about community stakeholder voice and listening and co-creating, engaging in ways that they didn't when the great IR guy wrote the plan and we all kind of ignored it for the time, right? Like that was pretty standard stuff. But there is more of that process development. And I think what's been underattended too is then that if I can reinterpret what you just said, that process of then how that applies to our work. What's changing about our work? We know we need to hustle to hit a number in a good plan. And we may even have greater faith if it was a good process development that that's the right number and that matters to our stakeholders and us and that sort of thing. But the how, the black box of what that changes about the management of work, which my critical reason for attacking strategic planning is that fear-based accountability part. That the how has always just been, well, if I yell at them a little better to hit their numbers, then they somehow will. And it's that theory X, theory Y, thinking of, are people inherently bad and they were just lazy unless you yell at them? Or are they just inherently good and need help achieving their best selves, right? And as leaders, we have to think differently about that. And a lot of traditional strategic planning is in that theory X, of which one's right, mindset of we just need to show it to them because they were too stupid to figure that out on their own before, and now we're going to get them there because we put the marker up there and they're going to hit their numbers of learning or enrollment or student satisfaction or whatever those numbers might be. And I like the idea of people being able to unpack and transparently think about in a theory-wide mindset, how do I get better in my practice and that process piece?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and with your understanding of the past, and again, one of the reasons why I like the Hoshin approach, the lean approach,
Yeah.
the Toyota approach, is because the two pillars of lean are continuous improvement, which is what is a strategic plan other than trying to continuously improve an organization over 1 year, 3 year, 5 year cycles or whatever, but also respect for people. And to exactly to the point you're making, which I really appreciate, is that the people know, all of our employees are want to do a good job. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to go into work today and do a really bad job, right? They want to do a good job. Sometimes we haven't given them the opportunity to do that. We
Mm.
haven't developed them to do that. We haven't given them the tools to do that. But once we start doing that, to use that, the empowerment phrase, once we start, unleashing the power of our employees at all levels, from custodians, to the senior leaders, unleashing everybody. I think we really have the great opportunity, and I think that's what your learning plan is. To me, is a key part of the learning plan, is that it really is turning over a lot of the work to the people rather than to the leadership. So it's not a top-down learning plan; it's a
Yep.
bottom-up learning plan.
Yeah, despite the fact that I was raised by two Marines, I hate hierarchy. My current boss is a general, so I hope he appreciates that I still listen to him. But the I want to talk about leashes. You said unleash, and I think that's it. Is that in some ways a fully articulated strategic plan that everyone we spent like 18 months getting the buy-in for and all the measures then creates this leash, and people feel like they need to salute and execute in a narrow lane rather than adopting new practice. And the reason I say that is the antecedents of Lean, of Six Sigma, of DMAIC, of TQM, whether or not the current higher education workforce recognizes all those ancestors that created the paradigm they're working in, those are still predicated on the notion that we can measure and get better and then narrow degrees of freedom for quality purposes to get that Lean and Six Sigma are about removing variation. And there's good reasons sometimes to, like, when you've got it nailed, to keep going. I get that. But my hypothesis, and it's just a hypothesis right now, would be in a social organization that our evidence shows that doesn't work as well, that the experimentation and the intersection of context, particularly with learners, is different. And it has a fundamental way that we need to differentiate instruction, that we need to differentiate the way that we serve and teach. And inherently, we have those paradigms in good scholarship of teaching and learning. And somehow, I believe, those don't fit in some of our historic paradigms of strategic planning. Now, your presentation on continuous improvement gives me hope that there's good faculty and leaders in the country that are thinking exactly that way, that how do we have CI within that context, that people are, everything you talked about, whether you said scientific principles, is that experiment within that. And then there's this broader hope that that fits in with the institutional view. And I think that what I would say is I think that is very true in a classroom space, in part because of the boundaries of academic freedom we put on it, right? We allow that. Teachers and professors get to kind of do in their classroom experiment what they want. And then we're saying, and I think you were saying, tell me if I heard you and Vincent wrong, is let's experiment. Let's try some things and see how it goes within that space. Institutionally, we have sort of retreated from an experimental approach in planning and said, yeah, in that space, that's good, but we want assurance of quality and less variation so that we target an outcome. I mean, just think about the growth of strategic enrollment management and like all these things that really narrow measures and practice in a way that we ought to think, at least reflectively think in higher ed about whether or not that's serving our purposes anymore in the same way.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, and yeah, I agree. I think certainly, and again, not to get too far in the weeds here, but certainly Six Sigma is about reducing variation, right?
Yep.
Making sure every widget is produced exactly the same way, and that works well if you're manufacturing, a bolt. Not so well if you're, graduating a student for sure. I think Lean is probably a little bit more open-minded to say like,
Yep.
yeah, if we find something that's working really well for our students, let's try to standardize that a little bit and share it broadly with people so that we're not, keeping our
Yep.
outcomes under the bushel basket and sharing them more broadly, but saying, but if the situation changes or the people change, we're going to be open to another experiment and say, this is working for our adult learners, but it's not working for our adult learners who are military because of differences in their lives or jobs or whatever it might be. So to your mind, now we great opportunity for just another experiment. And that's what I really like about your learning models. Let's experiment the hell out of this. And
Yeah.
we're
Where's the
we're going to come
tagline?
up we're going to come up with a lot of failed experiments, as Thomas Edison remarkably has said, to make the light bulb, it wasn't a one off, a one on or one off.
Right.
So there's going to be lots of experiments. But if you can create this learning environment that you're talking about, which is really exciting, so that people feel it's okay to fail. It's okay to say, you know what, I did 9 experiments, and damn if not one of them didn't turn out.
Yeah.
But I'm doing the 10th experiment, and that creating that safe space, psychological safe space for employees is
Yeah.
what's going to make it all work.
I think so. Great. Teresa, you
Yeah,
have.
I wanted to jump in because there are a couple of sets of questions in the chat that it just fit so perfectly with what you were saying. And I made a note that we have a new presentation title for next year, Experiment the Hell Out of It. We'll just
Woo!
keep that.
The whole kid.
Um, I think, though, for what you were just talking about, I want to share Jackie Kiger's question in the chat that kind of has to do with like maybe some back and forth or, balancing out the keep experimenting with the we still have to meet a target. So Jackie asks if the target can change before the stop date due to what we learn along the way. How do we ensure that this doesn't become an endless chase?
Ooh. Oh, Professor Kiger brings a good question. That's great. That's great. And I think part of it is that agreement. And that agreement ought to have some bound on it, right? About what are we trying to do and then typically in what period of time. Now maybe some condition introduces a different time variable, but typically what do we think? How long will it take to realize a result from trying something along the way and to create an agreement about that and create an agreement on the moment to step back and assess whether to go forward. Um, you know, I agree that endless chase is what has been an indictment of continuous improvement kind of all along, that people feel like it's never done. The continuous part is meaningful, that it just keeps going. And so I don't have a perfect answer. And Jackie, I'd be interested in ways to think about this with you is is rather than that continuous improvement to me is this ever like we won't ever reach. Whereas, a learning plan, like I learned this, like I can discreetly have a portfolio of things that I learned. And so maybe, we haven't graduated 100% of our students with straight A's yet. But we got a little bit better, and I can discreetly look at that and not just be on an endless chase. But it's something very helpful in time, I think, Teresa, to think through. Question.
Yeah, it's really a great question because depending on if you were at Toyota, they say of course it's going to be continuous, because cars are going to change, the people who buy cars are going to change.
Yep.
It's going to be a never-ending challenge. Sometimes our programs are going to be different, our students are going to be different, so there's a never ever changing aspects to the people we serve or the services or products, education we deliver. But I think there are some good tools out there to say, let's make sure that it's not endless, so that we can 30, 60, 90 kinds of plans to say, well, we're going to set some targets and just to put a little bit of a fence around the endless part of
Yeah.
it. and say, at some point we may have to make some changes, but allowing people to experiment and not saying you can do 3 experiments and that's it. I think I like the endless part, but with a fence around it, if that helps, Jackie.
And I hope that one of those fences, one of the things I like about higher ed is we celebrate. We put on the robes, we go to graduations, we have an annual cycle where we really reflect and think about how we're doing. And that's more than just a quarterly earnings report in a corporation or something. And I think that matters a whole lot. That the annual nature of that is something that animates me anyway.
Well, I can't believe how quickly this session went by. I think I will try to summarize a couple of questions that were along the same lines. And
Sure.
I think it's a great way to segue into today's conference sessions. But Jackie qualified his question by saying that, he's thinking about building trust and the challenges of that if something feels like an endless chase. Um,
Great point.
Jennifer Myers also asked, and somebody in the Q&A asked a similar question about how do you build trust toward a learning organization when you're working with folks who are used to a very structured, bounded environment? What sort of coaching might you do to help this flourish?
Hmm. No, that's a great question. I would love ideas on that. The way I can speak to the way that I've done that as a leader in an organization, which primarily starts with modeling. I'm one that will share the results of my 360 evaluations, share transparently my aims and how it's going. Um, our faculty council came this past spring with um, sort of felt like a list of demands, but really a list of things that they had concerns about. And we committed to addressing them and even threw a project manager on it to sort of say, we're going to follow up and we'll come back and we'll share the story of how this is going and commit to that in a way. And the transparency saying, I don't know how to solve all this, but here's what I'm going to try. And you all tell me if that's going. So I think modeling that vulnerability and transparency and modeling collective decision making. Simple as that. That it's easy for someone in my kind of position to tell people what to do. It's much harder to rally people in a way to reach agreement on something and to model the way that we do that. And when people start to see their voice enacted in the way the organization is moving, it takes time, but I hope then that they start to feel greater trust.
And I would only add that, as an organizational psychologist by training, I look at, all the things that happen in an organization that tell people what to believe, think, and behave. So I agree, a lot of it is leadership. Leadership really can set the stage. It's, do you have a culture that's going to support trust? Do you have personnel practices that support trust, decision-making practices that support trust, and on and on and on. So you've got to build it into the fabric of the organization for it to have,
Yeah.
all those forces aligning and say this is an organization that it really believes in trust. But Blake, as you said, it really has to start with the behavior of leaders. That at least can gets the ball rolling, and then people start to feel a little bit safer, and maybe they start to be a little bit more trusting. And then again, that flywheel, as they say, starts to turn. And then you really can create that really healthy, trusting organization.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Well, in our last couple of minutes, do either of you, Blake or Bill, have any last notes you'd like to share with the group?
I'll start with you, Bill.
Okay, well, I just really think that, again, a great session, and I hope I can get access to this so I can get your slides and acknowledge your contributions in work that I'm going to do in the future. I think there's a lot of just very much overlap between our two talks, so I really appreciated that, and I really like your pushing the envelope on creating a learning plan. And the metaphor that I keep having in my mind is that one of the racing regatta, right? Can you ensure that everyone has been taught to row, that everyone has an oar in the water, that everyone is rowing in the same direction, and it's the right direction? And I think you've got all those pieces there in the learning plan that can really get the boat moving in a good way. So thanks for allowing me to be a panelist, and I really enjoyed your talk, Blake.
Oh, I thank you for taking the time to be responsive. That's been, I think, really what made this session something. So I appreciate your thoughts, and I love the analogy of regatta because I like any sport where you have to dress up, right? Like that's what gets me excited. I'm a tennis guy, so that's great. So I'll just explain or wrap up by just saying this is an invitation, right? Like the whole point of this is not that there's a directive here, but an opportunity that if we think we're head down in a paradigm that's immutable. It's not like there's a possibility of thinking differently about planning in higher ed. And so, how might we do that? How might we get at a different way of enacting our practice in ways that's more exciting and more impactful? Maybe this is it. Maybe it's something else. But I hope everyone takes up the charge to try something new. Thanks, Teresa. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining. And I just want to double down that all of these slides and this whole presentation will be shared. So don't worry, keep your eye on your email because TLC will notify you when materials are available. Um, and yes, this was an inspiring talk and really aligned to the learning outcome we set yesterday regarding mental models. This is challenging some of our assumptions. So everyone, I hope you take that into the next sessions you attend today, and we'll see you around. Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks so much.